Hello there, this is Norm Scott. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wanted to learn to draw like a really mediocre comics artist? Well, today is your chance. Today I'm going to make those dreams come true because we have another episode of How to Draw Comics with Norm. Again, as with the last one, this is completely unscripted, which means that about half of the running time is going to be just me coughing or saying, So get ready for that. I guess we've already jumped right in. You saw that little flash there. That was me going back to the last page because if you think I can actually remember what things look like from page to page, you're really overestimating my abilities. Pretty much everything here, especially anything that is specific to this particular comic. In this particular case, the figure seeing in the middle, if you have not seen the rest of the comic, the figure in the middle there is the Sea Witch. And yeah, there she is in better form on the last page. I have no idea what she looks like. I don't actually have object permanence yet, so basically I have to keep the old page open, take a look back. I don't actually make character sheets because that takes work and really not something I'm into, quite frankly. I should mention here, I am still getting over a cold, so if I break into a coughing fit or fall over or die during the course of this, just play along with it. The video should finish without me. This was all recorded previously, and I did have the foresight to actually get everything set up while I was making it because I thought somebody may find it interesting at some point. I may be being optimistic there, who knows. What we're seeing right now so far as the pencil work going on, that's me roughing out basically where everything may go. A lot of this changes as time goes on because I'm really not that good, so I have to change pretty much everything. Especially you'll see that the roughs, my roughs are very rough. There are pencilers out there who will go back and clean up, and you know, I envy them their time. Okay, there I just moved a dialogue box. One thing again, if you didn't see the last one, I tend to do my dialogue, I actually write it in beforehand because there is a lot of it, and the smarter thing to do, the thing you would do if you actually had time and a budget, would be you'd actually plot out the entire page ahead of time, and you'd basically block out where everything's going to take place on the page itself. I don't bother doing that. What I do make a difference, pardon, I lost my thought there. What I do is I actually write down all the dialogue first, and that way I build the art around it. This is the worst possible way to do art. You shouldn't do that, but I've got a lot of dialogue, and quite frankly, the dialogue's more important than the art. It's as you can see. And I'm going back and forth right here, trying to see what the Sea Witch actually looked like. Again, completely forgot. So I don't know if you can tell it now. There'll be a few things on here that I can point out specific portions where I had to go back and change stuff. But if you look at her staff, you can barely tell it now. But, okay, I don't actually know. Sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. If you look at her staff, you can see that the fish actually has an X'd out eyeball because I thought that her staff was literally a dead fish, but apparently if I went back and looked at it later, I changed the eyeball to a regular pupil because apparently it is just a carved fish. Again, I don't keep track of this stuff. Now there's my cleanup, and that's about as clean as it ever gets. A lot of pencilers, a lot of really good pencilers, will actually clean up to the point that you could basically trace over their pencil marks with the ink, and you'd essentially have a finished comic. If I traced over my pencil marks with the ink, I'd have a mess, just an absolute god-awful mess. And again, the other part of drawing the otters is that they're not really three-dimensional characters, so there's no good way to draw the back of their heads to separate their eyeballs from the rest. I'm glad this isn't in color because I'm not sure where the delineation would be. As you can see, I try to work little tiny background jokes into these, and a lot of the time, they're not even completely legible in the final picture, so you may actually see a little bit more here than you would see in the actual comic. A lot of the time I end up drawing the jokes too small, and they basically just exist for me, more or less. That is a stunning example of drawing a swordfish with no reference. So it looks like the spy from Mad Magazine. And we're drawing the employee room there. Staff only. Now, I'm not sure if this actually gets conveyed in the final one because, again, my art's not very good, but those are supposed to be a chandelier where the light bulbs are actually stuffed blowfish attached. A little Flintstones aesthetic for you. And again, this is basically just cleanup here. And my cleanup, again, it's not really cleanup. It's mostly just to narrow down where everything actually is. It's not really clean. It's mostly just for my benefit so that I don't have to guess at the final. And do a little crab up there. Now, if you look in the lower right, you can see Max. Sorry, there he is. Max, he's holding up what I originally thought was going to be a novelty fishing lure, and again, it was just going to be a little throwaway gag. He was going to hold it and it maybe had Richard Nixon's face or something. I realized at some point I couldn't figure out what the actual gag was going to be. And again, this is a gag that probably nobody even noticed in the final, but I was so paralyzed by doubt on that one that I ended up not finishing that until considerably later. And if you can't read that in the final, Chip is holding a fish a month calendar with sexy fish pinups. That was me making another mistake there. Max's hair, his 4 strands of hair, and I apparently just abandoned. No, I got 4 strands. Sorry. And again, these don't appear in the script. These are just spur of the moment crap I throw in there. Sometimes they're not funny. Most of the time, they're not funny at all. They're the kind of thing you sort of smile politely at if I'm actually standing in the same room with you. That's a jar of miscellaneous fish bits. And, okay, and apparently I got confident and I'm moving on to the next panel there. Faces, at this point in my career, I'm fairly confident that I can put a face together to the point that I can, people can recognize it as a face. I'm proud of that. Trying to pencil out some basic underlighting on this one. We'll get into the lighting a bit later. It's a dicey subject, especially whether you're dealing with actual inks trying to convey it. There are way, way better inkers than me out in the world. Most inkers are better than me. However, I have the distinct advantage of not charging myself for my labor, so that's a little seaweed on her shoulder there. Someday I aspire to be the kind of artist who doesn't have to actually specify that that's seaweed, and you can just sort of tell it. And that is, I think I'm drawing a hermit crab in her hair. I don't know. And there is Scamp S. Otter holding up the Fishatarius Arcanum, a mystical book that contains all sorts of dark fishing secrets. And we clean that up there. And again, cleaning in the academic sense. The Fishatarius Arcanum is supposed to have a fish pressed inside its pages, which is, that's supposed to be a tail hanging out of it. Again, theoretically, if you do this right, people can tell later on. But that's why I make these videos, so that I don't have to draw well. I can just tell you what he's actually seeing. There we go. That's me. Burst of inspiration. What is he actually holding there? It is a keychain made of a dead minnow. That's right. And this is how much I care. I actually turned the entire canvas around to write out a little description that literally you're not going to be able to see what it says in the final one. It's just going to be way too small. It's important to remember these are literally just 3 panels of a 4-tier comic page. So they really don't take up much real estate if you're actually looking at the page itself. That's not saying I'm putting a lot of work into them. I'm just saying that they are... The details I draw are a little too small to actually be seen, which makes me, again, not a very good artist. And there is Scamp boldly pointing ahead, and now we're drawing Chip looking up at the Sea Witch, who is manning the register there. Now again, I'm not sure how much of this carries through. I did block out the figures to the extent that I could sort of guess where they are. But again, things... a lot of this is... Well, all of this is being done on the fly. And again, just another spur-of-the-moment gag. Doesn't mean anything, wasn't in the script. It's just something they print on their bags. One nice thing about big noses is that they have a very definite 3-dimensional shape. If you got somebody with a normal nose, a pretty girl's nose, for instance, that one, it's hard to draw it with any kind of definition without suddenly turning into this giant honker. However, somebody who already has a giant honker, it's well defined and it's a joy to draw. And we're drawing the other side of the cabinet we saw on the first with a "Please do not lick the fish" sign on it. Have similar warnings in most museums. And just enough a suggestion of that blowfish chandelier to sort of let the, I was going to say player, to let the viewer know that we are still in the same room. And again, we're drawing the basics of the desk. Oh, and here I'm drawing in these are supposed to be the impulse items near the register, and this one is the Singin' Smallmouth Mini Minnow, and I only point that out because I honestly don't know. That may actually be a real product. That seems like the sort of thing that would already be on the shelves. They're just a smaller version of the big mouth Billy Bass. So if it already exists, don't sue me, Mini Minnow Maker. I did not think it through. All right, and I'm not sure what I just did there. Sorry, I'm watching this on a lower resolution. Oh, I see. Okay, I'm making a new layer. You'd think that I didn't actually do this. All right, no, what I'm doing right now, these are the structural layers, and you can see that I'm actually using an assisted tool to make the curved lines on all these, as opposed to drawing them freehand, which is I went into this on a little bit on the last video I did, but basically, yes, it's cheating, and yes, I don't care. Nobody's going to be looking at these close enough to make any real difference. It is anything that'll make the job faster without significantly compromising the quality. And again, this doesn't really compromise the quality. It actually makes it considerably better than it would be if it was freehand. I just feel that I am cheating a little bit by not freehanding it. But again, I don't care. Now, what we're doing here, you can see that I'm doing these lines go behind the characters, and you can see that I'm actually erasing out the portions that they will be occupying in just a bit here. Now, this is one of the many places where my extremely sloppy penciling plays against me, because Again, all the penciling is still more or less just approximations of where they're actually going to be in 3D space. So when I actually do pencil, there may be some white space still hanging around in the areas they were occupying. And again, very important if you are to understand the essence of my comics, is I don't really care. As long as it gets finished. There's a... finishing is so much more important than getting everything right. Perfectionism is not just overrated, it's crippling. Unless you actually have people depending on your work. I should say that perfectionism in comics is crippling. It's not going to help you. If you're designing a space shuttle, be a perfectionist. If you're, transit systems, braking systems, do actually try to put a little effort into that. That's important. And if you can't make that out, which I guarantee you cannot, he actually says, the tag actually says, genuine fish keychain, and then as the little blurb on the side, it's dead. A strong selling point, because who wants a live fish keychain? That's just foolish. You didn't hear that, but I just paused the video to have a coughing fit, so you can thank me later for cutting that out. And there, that's a, see, that was me trying to freehand and then going back to it. And I should also mention that it still doesn't look right. That ended up with Max having, I think, a 3 or 4 foot long arm on a 2 foot tall creature. What we really count on in these situations is nobody looking at this for a very long period of time. Which begs the question of why I decided to make this, half-hour video? I don't know. And if you can't tell, I'm sure you can tell, this is time compressed. I'm not forcing you to watch the entire process. Nor am I anywhere near this fast. In fact, I'm honestly surprised to see how purposeful I am in this. Normally I'm really meandering and, I don't know, checking Twitter or something. Okay, again, another fancy little mistake. Normally when you see editing room footage, it's something interesting, but mostly what I cut out is just bad. And there, I actually put in the word calendar, because nobody would understand what it just says, a fish a month. Now, the inking process, again, my inking process, which differs significantly from people who are actually trained in this sort of thing, is mostly a matter of narrowing down which of the million lines I put in that I actually think is the right one. I'm frequently wrong, but that's okay. Again, the important thing is getting to the finish line, and then after that, you'd be surprised how few complaints I've ever heard about how crappy my art is. And I'm not saying it's not crappy, I am saying nobody cares enough to point it out. Rob Liefeld, I should say. Rob Liefeld, he actually has an impact. He's a terrible artist, but there are people who actually will be monitoring his work for all the little mistakes he makes, and they can go on for hours about it. Mine, there are mistakes there. They're there for anybody who wants to see and point them out. But one of the nice things about being fairly obscure is that nobody's going to make a big deal out of it. Oh yeah, those little frilly things. I didn't actually pencil those in, but I remembered just at that moment that they existed. So again, that's a bit of my professionalism there. And again, just a sort of suggestion of a hand. One thing about the human eye is that if you get the drawing busy enough, nobody's going to be able to take in the actual details. put in a lot of greebles. That way, there's nothing they can really focus on. Your anatomically accurate pufferfish. Exactly as you would see them. Actually, I suppose I should have put spines on them, shouldn't I? Well, live and learn. Maybe it was just a regular fish and somebody just grabbed one and blew it up like a rubber glove. Here, cleaning up the fish bits jar. And again, you can see assisted curves make that process a lot faster. Now that one, I freehanded. Again, the path, the easiest path is the one I'm always going to take. The only reason I would not have used assisted lines on that part is because it was easier to do it without. She is a witch, of course. So presumably that's a side business. And those are the little credit card signs, and ha 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 ha. It's a Fisha card. Ha 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 ha. And that is supposed to be the cursed book, and that on top of it is supposed to be the cursed compass that is referenced in the dialogue, but there's no way anybody could actually tell that. It's supposed to be barnacles hanging onto it, and then there's the trucker cap. Now, I'm going a bit, Alright. Apparently I got bored with that panel and I moved on to the next one, which is understandable. I can, just watching it right now, I can tell that part was getting kind of tedious. When you're working on the little background stuff, the stuff that doesn't really make an impact, kind of feels like you're, treading... Now, there's a part right there. Sorry to interrupt my earlier named one, but that's a part where the cleanup actually makes better sense of the scrawl that I put in earlier than I actually... Like, sometimes when you get lucky, sometimes just the nature of the inking tool itself will push you in the right direction. Now, a lot of times it'll put you in the wrong direction, but sometimes just the way that you actually, just the way that the tool is structured, the any kind of proper use will push it more or less in the right direction. And I think that's one of the things I found as I, when I started inking, is that a lot of the look you associate with professional inking is just down to the way you actually use any of the given tools. Like, it would be unintuitive to use the tools in a different fashion. I'm not sure if I'm making a lick of sense here. A strong warning to the employees about washing your everything after you juggle the fish. Apparently this was enough of a issue in the workplace that they had to issue the warning. And a door off perspective, that's fine. Nobody cares. Now I'm jumping the gun in several places here. Like, I'm actually doing a bit more detail work than I would normally be doing. Normally I would hold all the detail work until I finished all the broad lines. That's the smarter way to do it. There you can see another time where I tried to freehand, realized that I hopelessly unable to do so, and then use the curve tool. And there's Poseidon's mighty trident. And again, use the curve tool until it is no longer expedient to do so. Now, generally the smart way to work with your inking is to do your broad lines first and work your way back. This is presuming that you have a decent idea of what you're actually hoping to accomplish with the line work. But the human eye is going to be drawn to the broad lines first, and then it's going to be slowly work its way through the smaller ones. And you can see that I, in the lower right-hand side, the tool is set right now to like 1 point something. Generally, on my work, I don't know if... I have no idea how anybody else works. I've never studied that much. But generally, for medium objects, pretty much everything in there, I will be doing it at a 1.0. For smaller objects, background objects, I will do all the broad line work at 8.0, or 0.8, I should say, not 8.0. And then any of the actual detail work, I'll either do at 0.8, 0.7, something along those lines. Now, pretty much every drawing tool you're going to get nowadays on a computer is going to have a certain level of correction on it. And correction is basically just if you're making a long line, your hand is going to shake. And those are picked up by the drawing tools, and you'll see it more on, if I try to draw a long line, you'll see that there is a, after the line goes, I'm not sure if you can get an idea of it, but once it actually, once I lift the pen, the line will correct. It'll actually smooth itself out. That's basically what the correction does. And that is exceedingly useful when you're drawing your basic line work. In your detail, it actually works against you. So a lot of times if you are going to be doing your smaller details, once you've done your larger line work, you'll try to set, you don't necessarily need to cut off correction entirely, but you do want to set it down to a considerably lower level. That way it'll give you a room, because your detail work takes place a lot faster than the other work. So you don't have the you don't have as much potential for your hand shaking to screw up the line. This would be especially for, you know, short lines like on people's faces. Now, everything you're seeing here right now is being done with a moderate amount of correction on it. Until I actually get to extremely small detail work, I keep the correction on, because generally it's more useful than not. And you can still do small correction work, or small detail work with correction on, but you have to move slower. And the again, if nothing else you've picked up from the nature of my work, is that getting this mess done fast is inherent. It's that's the guiding principle. Just get it over with. I have kind of a busy schedule. And again, your correction tool, register again. That's the kind of award-winning commentary you get on these, where I point out exactly what's happening on screen. And I don't know what that is. I guess it's just a hanging fish. And that's the other bad thing about your little throwaway gags, especially if you have to do a repeat situation, is that the second time you do it, the first time, if you're lucky, if the people like you, they might smile a little bit, but if they have to read the same background gag 2 or 3 times, they're going to hate you. They're actually going to write letters and make threats to your family. And I can't blame them. Nothing I can do. Which is one of the reasons that from this exact same angle on the first panel, you did not see the singing smallmouth mini minnow. So, we broke the laws of time and space just to bring you a fresh gag. And I hope you appreciate it. And again, that gag right there, not innuendo, didn't even think about it at the time. It's literally just a warning for small kids not to lick any of the fish in the... Which, again, may... it may behoove some people, I'm not naming any names, but it may behoove you to actually think out some of your background gags before you commit them to ink. Just saying. Again, ha ha ha, ha ha, ha. Oh, and apparently I thought that it wasn't complete there, so voila. And a little bit of packaging right there. Yes, that's right. Sell the sizzle. And at a certain point, I just go on the lookout for whatever I missed. Okay, I guess I'm actually up to the detail work now. And again, in a lot of this, I actually jumped the gun. I really should have held off on most of the detail work until later in the process, but no big deal. This is basically start with the faces and then work your way down. Smaller details. And when I say details, I don't really mean actual details. I mean just the little lines that would suggest where details would be if I actually cared enough to draw them. I clearly do not. A really good artist can make little lines that suggest details that aren't really there. In my case, I put little lines in to confuse you. Alright, now I'm doing the selection tool there. Because I'm starting to do shading. And I see right now that I forgot to ink the two little plaques behind her. There we go. See? Good job, Norm. And this is... Sorry, fill tools on these are always a bit fiddly, especially if you still have the correction on. Whoops. Because, whoops. There we go. One thing I didn't mention is that I actually did the curved lines on a separate layer than the regular lines, which meant that every time I was trying to use the fill tool there, it was jumping over the lines because the lines, it's only going to fill on the layer it's in. So the borders that I thought I was seeing aren't actually on that layer. And anything that's too fiddly to fill in on the outside have to go in and actually freehand it. And a lot of the purpose of your large areas of black is just for separation. You're really just trying to, again, because the human eye is drawn to high contrast objects. I mean, beyond the part where it's actually specifically indicating shade, you're really just trying to separate pieces from each other so that the human eye, which is by nature kind of on the lazy side, will be able to find the objects without a lot of work. Alright, and I think I'm going to make another mistake here. Well, I seem to remember this one happening earlier. There we go, yep. Because that line, again, not on the same layer, so I actually have to go back and draw it in. Voila. And more freehanding on the... There, oops. Oh, yep, sure. Oh, there we go. I can tell you, as boring as this is watching it now, It was way worse actually drawing it. Occasionally you'll see me pausing with the pen, and you may think I'm being thoughtful, but nope, not really. Usually in real time you would have heard a long, mournful sigh. Alright, now I'm actually doing some actual shading work, and again, these are mostly to just make specific features pop out a little bit. Now, if I was a good artist, which I'm not, the shading would actually correspond to specific light sources. You'd actually go in and you would, for instance, trace out the blowfish lamp, and you'd actually make your rays correspond. I don't bother doing that. Directional light. Now, here actually is an example of me trying to do directional light. There's a light source apparently underneath her face. And so I'm trying to make all the shade work its way up. Whoops. And you can see that I don't really accomplish that, and then we have to go back and we fix some of that with the actual tone work. And now with that said, a lot of this you kind of just have to take it on faith through experience, that after a while, if you worry it into position enough, it will eventually look passable. You kind of have to be a little prescient in the idea. You have to kind of know what's coming so far as what you're actually going to do with your tone work or whatnot. One of the lessons I have actually absorbed over time is that if I know that I'm going to be doing tone work, or if I know I'm going to be doing color, there are different techniques for each of those when the inking phase happens. A lot of the things I would normally have done as very small detail work, I don't bother doing when I actually have tones, because again, a lot of these largely just, rather than being specific details, rather than being a specific feature that you can narrow down, a lot of those end up just being little lines that are there to add weight or texture to an object, and they can be accomplished much better, more uniformly with tone work than they can with a freehand drawing. Although, with that said, you can see that I'm making all kinds of little random lines right now, because apparently I didn't get enough of that earlier. I'm really all over the map on this one. I thought I was a bit more structured than this, but clearly not. Normally, once I get to the point where I'm actually doing the shading, I've already finished all of the detail work, but I guess I was doing panel by panel on this one, so clearly didn't think this out at all. Now, one thing you can see, I didn't actually draw attention to it earlier, but I have finally hidden the pencil layer, and that's a bit of an important step on this, because one of the things the pencil layer does is that it makes it look a little better than it actually is. The pencils kind of smear together in your mind to create the impression of details that aren't really there, which granted, that's kind of the plan in the long game, but you're not going to leave your pencils in, so it's best to get rid of them early on and figure out what to do to simulate what they were propping up earlier. Alright, and now I'm actually creating a tone layer, and in particular now this is specific to Manga Studio. There are different blending options for Photoshop and Sai and some of your other tools there. But in this one in particular, again, it has a quirk where the multiply effect that appears on screen while you're drawing does not actually carry over to the final product, which means, for whatever reason, that some of the blending options you would have normally seen, you actually see happening on screen, don't actually happen when you render the final page. Now, what I'm doing right now is just laying down a layer at about 15% opacity for the ambient light in the room. In this particular case, it is actually radiating out from the blowfish chandelier at the top. And now I go in with a heavier opacity. I think this was around 30, 35-ish. And I'm actually drawing in some shadows on the characters themselves. And for what it is worth, I actually am trying, to a certain extent, to follow the light from the chandelier itself. To a certain extent. I'm not going to get crazy about this. We're still drawing cartoon otters here. Now, the purpose of your tone layer, the purpose of all your special effects layer, literally just to make it look good. It's more important to get finished than get to correct. And there, some meticulous shading on something that nobody will ever see. And a bit of tone work on the old sea witch there. Oh, nice. Couple shadows. Shadow on the swordfish. Just pointing out exactly what you are seeing happening on screen. This is what it's going to be like in my old age. Alright, now I actually moved the opacity down in order to do the tone work on her, because this is happening on a white background, so we don't have to overcome any of the surrounding tones. And just a little bit of shading on the tips of the blowfish. It's hard to convey a actual glow if you don't have a spread. No, sorry, got by myself. What I'm going back here is I'm actually going back in with a white tone brush and putting in reflection and such on the creatures. And I'll go back in again with a completely solid, not a tone brush, but a regular brush, a regular pen set to white, and I'll add highlights there. But basically, same procedure on this one. I'm going in any of the areas that already have a 15% tone, I'm going back in with a 30. And I'm drawing in just so that the 30 shows up on there. Now, I'll admit to a bit of cowardice. A lot of people can use heavier, more opaque tones on theirs. With impunity, I cannot. I'm always worried I'm going to screw that up, so generally speaking, my tones never get too far beyond about 40% opacity. Now, as an extremely interesting fact, I hope you'll write that down. And going back in there. There we go. And now we go back down to a lower opacity, and we're doing a bit of the shadows on Scamp as he looks at the Fishatarius Arcanum. And you can see that I select the area there. Again, this is just so I can be a little bit sloppy on the edges without having to worry about the tone spilling out beyond. Now, this one, pretty much the entire thing is in the 35% opacity. And I just bored myself into silence. Sorry about that. I keep forgetting how tedious this part is. But you can get the general idea. And if not, then you can use this video for a sleep aid. Just let it gently carry you on to. There we go. Maybe I should turn this into an ASMR series. Look at me, drawing all that crap. Are you tired yet? Your eyelids getting sleepy. suppose technically your eyelids don't get sleepy. You would get sleepy. That's the kind of quality you get when you listen to my tutorials. Which I'm pretending this is. I'm hoping that you can actually get something useful out of this. But at the same time, eh. Alright, and again, we're going back in with a white tone. Now, the white tone is only set to an opacity to overcome whatever's currently there. So I think I got it at 15%. So on any of the areas that were at 15% on the regular tone work, it'll go to a solid white. But you can see on the parts that were at 30, it's just going to take it back down to 15%. And finally, what am I doing here? Oh yeah, I'm actually going back in with a white pen. Now the white pen I actually set to a little bit broader because the tone work is kind of on the light side, so it's it has to be kind of broad just to be noticeable. That is to say, I think I've got it set to like 1.3. That would be what I would normally do if this was a for black line work. This would be foreground weight. And actually using the curve assist tool there. And when it got hard, where I would have had to go behind Max's hair there, I just didn't bother because that's the kind of professional I am. And most people won't notice. Putting a little bit of reflection on anything that is wet, just a good solid dot in the center of it. That's a good way to indicate that you've got something that's a bit moist. Yuck. And right there, yep. The nice clean lines there. And it really does, if you actually can get to the point where you get some contrast on that, where you get a good solid gray over to white, it makes a big difference on the final product. If it's on the, if it's very subtle on the back, it does not make a big difference, and you may wonder why you bothered doing it. But with that said, this is one of the easiest bits on there. Makes a big difference in the final, and it does not take a lot of time, especially in relation to the other work you've already done. One of the nice things about this type of work is that right there, I forgot from the last panel or last page that the Fishatarius Arcanum actually had some dark energy surrounding it, so I finally went back and drew that in. But what I was going to say is that your final stages on most of these are just about making it look good, and as a result, it's really easy to get bogged down on the detail parts because they're so boring. I mean, incredibly boring. And it's hard to do. Eventually, it just wears you down. It's just an absolute slog to get there. So one of the nice things about reaching the stage where you're literally just trying to make it look good, where all the foundation stuff is already done, all the lines are in place, you're making fast improvements, and that is as close as you get on this kind of thing to feeling the wind in your hair. But okay, I guess this qualifies as done. We have went from a blank page to what I would more or less honestly consider finished art. I'd be willing to put this in a book right now. I wouldn't necessarily want anybody to stare at it for a long period of time, but you know, there it is. Anyway, I hope somebody was able to get something useful from this. If not, again, use it as a sleep aid or just have it on in the background. Enjoy the melodious sound of my voice. If you want to see more of this art or this particular comic, it's in progress right now. You can find it on the Patreon page, which is linked below. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you taking the time to sit through. Holy crap, this running right around 50 minutes. I am so sorry. But if you did actually stick around all this time, thank you very much for making it all the way through this. Again, I apologize for taking up this much of your day. There are other things you could be doing. You could be cultivating relationships that will last you a lifetime, or even playing a video game right now, but you decided to spend the time with me, and I appreciate it. Or you just skip to the end, in which case I still appreciate it. Well, yeah, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. If you're here, you're hearing this. So thank you very much for joining me. I may do another one of these again at some point. Tell me if you actually watched it. I would be interested in knowing. But otherwise, y'all have yourselves a very good evening, and thank you very much for sitting with us today. Y'all take care. Norm out.